Hello guys, I'm Counterfactual History, and this is my first video on the channel, and this is going to be kind of like just an informal discussion about what I plan to do on this channel, and also in the second half, it's going to be more of an opinion piece about what I think alternate history provides to the field of history, and just some of my counterpoints to some of the common complaints I've heard against alternate history. But anyway, I'm just going to get start with what I plan to cover on this channel. So if you're going to tell from the fact that, it's called Counterfactual History, and I, talk about how I want to make an opinion piece towards the end, towards the second half of this video about alternate history scenarios, you can probably guess that, yeah, this channel is going to be an alternate history channel primarily, I'd say. So I'm going to obviously be making my own scenarios on alternate history for elections, wars, battles, alliances, revolutions, any big conspiracies, any big religious splits or movements, and any other alternate history scenarios I think of. So I'm going to be making my own scenarios for those. I also plan to cover real life history in the same variety of topics. There'll also just be some real life history and the alternate history scenarios to begin with, just as kind of a setup. But there will be some probably dedicated real life history videos as well. I'd also like to do some more videos about some of the Hearts of Iron 4 mods that present alternate history scenarios, such as the New Order, the Thousand Week Reich, Kaiserreich, Collapsing World, Red Flood, Age of Imperialism, and any other alternate history scenarios I find in that regard, because those actually are really interesting alternate history scenarios to look at. So I'll be making more videos on those. I also plan to just do some opinion pieces on historical topics and some of the other alternate history scenarios I come across. So there will probably be lower videos on Hearts of Iron 4 mods, and then maybe an opinion piece video later about how I think the mod is. And also, since the way I typically do those topics I just talked about would be in the form of a slideshow, which kind of takes a little bit of time to set up, and I want a little bit more consistent content to upload to this channel, I'll also be including gameplay of history-based games such as Hearts of Iron 4, as well as those Hearts of Iron 4 mods I talked about, alongside other history-based ones, because I also have I think it's called Age of the Orient that I didn't cover, and Road to 56 and the Great War Redux. Those aren't necessarily alternate history. They have a little bit of alternate history since you can branch the paths. Same with regular Hearts of Iron 4, but those are more history based rather than dedicated alternate history scenarios. But yeah, so I plan to cover Hearts of Iron 4 and other mods in terms of gameplay. I also want to play some of the Total War franchise that I own, such as Total War Shogun and Total War Rome 2, and any other Total War historical games I get later on. So I plan to cover those. Also plan to cover the new campaign trail. So that's an election simulator where you just play through an election. It also has alternate history scenarios that I plan to cover as well, alongside the lore videos on the Hearts of Iron 4 mods. There will also be lore videos on the new campaign trail scenarios, and I'll play those as well for the gameplay. I also got the Oregon Trail recently, so I can die of dysentery or cholera or broken bones or any other number of stupid things. So I have that for gameplay. And then I also got a World War I based game called All Quiet in the Trenches, which I'm excited to play. That's kind of a narrative game. And there's plenty of other historical games, so I will probably get even more down the line that I'll include gameplay of. I just don't have any off the that I can list off the top of my head to include among those. But there will probably be others depending on what I purchase. But anyway, that's about all I plan to cover on this channel. It is a very history-centric channel. That's kind of the whole point of it. I know it's shocking. Counterfactual History channel is primarily history focused. Isn't that crazy? But anyway, so if that's why you came to this video, just to see what I was planning to cover, that's about it for this topic. So if you feel free to leave. If not, I'll go into the opinion piece real quick. But yeah, if this does seem interesting to you, please like and subscribe. Comment down anything below that you'd also like to see me cover. But anyway, I want to get into my opinion piece about alternate history, because I know it's a fairly popular niche of history. There's a number of popular YouTubers about it. I know it has a fan base ish. I don't really know if you could call it that, but like it definitely has a community. But I've also heard some people like critique it, which is fair. I mean, I think most fields can be critiqued, and some of these complaints are valid. So like typical complaints I hear about alternate history from a couple different people is that it allows certain people to promote extremist ideologies or revisionist narratives. I've also heard that it simplifies history and doesn't always consider all the factors in play. Obviously, since alternate history scenarios are like not concrete reality, no matter how plausible you try to make them, because it's just not concrete reality, it is very susceptible to the author's bias. As I said before, isn't grounded in reality and thus cannot be verified. I've heard some people say that it draws attention away from actual like real life history to focus on speculation, and that that attention that goes into alternate history should instead just go to regular history. And yeah, some people I've heard say that like it hollows out the history field, can lead to a denial of facts, and yeah, heavily favors agendas. Which I will say those are valid criticisms. There are definitely some biased alternate history channels. Can't think of any off the top of my head, but I know they exist. I know one was like incredibly pro-communist, and another one was like pro-fascist almost, or like heavily right-wing. So it is true that like there is credibility to these complaints. I'm not going to deny that. But I would like to offer some counterpoints to those complaints, because for as much as alternate history can theoretically improve like revisionist narratives by saying like, oh, had this other side won, the world would have been so much better, it can also help disprove those revisionist and extremist narratives by being like, well, if you actually look at the facts and try to make logical jumps from those facts, if that other side won, no, the world would actually be worse than it was. Another counterpoint I'd like to bring up is that like everything in history can be oversimplified or overlooked. So this isn't necessarily a unique flaw to alternate history, which I think could be, applied to a lot of these complaints about alternate history. It's just the fact that like it's not really a unique flaw to alternate history. Most of this is just to the history field in general. Because like, you can oversimplify history. You could just say, oh, well, the Germans lost World War II because the Russians had more men, which ignores, all the other factors that played into Germany losing, like, their racial ideology being so extreme that they would shoot themselves in the foot, or, Britain and America's industrial power, or any number of factors. Like, there's a ton of factors on, like, as to why Germany lost World War II. So, like, you can oversimplify history as well. Actually, there's an entire channel about that called, like, Oversimplified. So, yeah. Oversimplifying history isn't necessarily a flaw to alternate history. And actually, I've met a lot of, I haven't personally met them, but I know a lot of good alternate history YouTubers that actually, research a bunch and put in, a lot of detail into the actual historical factors in play. So, I would say that, alternate history is the same as history, of that you can either go really in depth with it, or you can oversimplify it. That's my point there. Another area where alternate history and history have the same flaw is that, being susceptible to presenter bias, history is also just very susceptible to bias anyway. You can have, a person argue for one side of, a war and present, actual historical facts, but, spin them in a way that, kind of overlooks other details and is obviously biased and meant to sway people over to their side. So that's another area where I think history and alternate history have the same flaw, is bias. You can have a biased, historian who says one thing that's biased, or you can have an alternate history YouTuber who's also biased. So that's kind of my opinion on that. I'd also like to argue that while alternate history isn't verifiable, it's a good thought experiment. And yeah, that's something I'll bring up later whenever I talk about what I think the alternate history field contributes to the overall field of history. But I would like to point out here that I think even if it isn't verifiable, it's still a good thought experiment, and I don't know what you call them. But yeah, thought experiment and like exercising critical thinking. That's what I'm thinking of. Um, and I'll also talk about how it helps bring people to history that is verifiable because like let's talk about I'd say Possible History is a pretty good example. He's an alternate history YouTuber, but he covers like a whole bunch of like regular history in his videos, even though they're alternate history scenarios. And I think that's a good way to get people to look into like the actual historical scenarios. So like I would argue that, you know, A, it's a good thought experiment, and B, it can help bring people to history that is verifiable, even if the alternate history scenario itself isn't. I think this point is kind of the point below that is kind of redundant anyway. We've already kind of talked about how it can bring people into history, and I'll cover that later again. I made this slideshow, I think, late at night, and I kind of repeat some points, but that's okay. But yeah, overall, I would actually say that alternate history flushes out the field of history, can help bring new people into the field of history, and it's overall just a fun thought experiment that can promote further research and analysis of history. So, as for what I actually think alternate history provides to like the field of history, first and foremost, it's a very entertaining medium and it's very easy to access. It's in mods, it's in YouTube form. I think there was a failed TV show about it. There's been books about it. And it can help bring more people into the field of history and help get them interested in actual history. So that's like one key component of alternate history is it kind of serves sort of like a museum, not quite. There's obvious differences, but I will say that both like serve to bring people into the history field, and I would say alternate history can serve that role as well. I would also say it encourages research into key events and factors to see why something went one way rather than an alternate way. That's typically referred to as like trying to find a divergence point to get your alternate history scenarios. You need to find what factors or what events you can change and which ones actually matter enough to form like a new scenario. So it actually does encourage further research. And furthermore, whenever, you know, an alternate history YouTuber or alternate history writer does that and like puts in that research into key events and factors, typically they'll put that research onto the internet or like onto bookshelves in a very accessible form for others to find. So you're spreading research around to other people. Now back to that one point I was bringing up, alternate history promotes critical thinking and analysis of history rather than simply repeating facts. I think it's very easy for some people to checkpoint or bullet point history of like you just divide it up into the key events, but you don't actually think about like how they play into each other. Like, you know, I kind of like I know high school history is necessarily a good example of this because I know that there's a ton of history to cover and I have the utmost respect for high school history teachers. But I think some people can walk away feeling like they just memorize bullet points of like World War II. Oh, well, bullet points. Battle of Britain, Battle of Stalingrad, Battle of Berlin, D-Day, even though D-Day came first. I got those out of order, but that's okay. You know, I think the point still stands of like bullet pointing key events rather than seeing how they all played into each other. And I think alternate history promotes that critical thinking and analysis that kind of helps bring people away from bullet point thinking about history and gets them to look at all the different factors and how they all played into each other and how it's all like interwoven. So I would say that, yeah, it's a very valuable thought experiment. It helps, and this ties into another point, is that it actually helps like shine a light on events in history that I think tend to get overlooked, like events that seem minor but could have actually changed things radically. Like, I don't know the name of the specific incident, but there was an incident a little bit before Japan invaded China in the Second Sino-Japanese War, where Chiang Kai-shek was captured by the communists. So it's like, it's an event that often gets overlooked, but had that gone differently, it could have resulted in a very different timeline. So I would argue that like alternate history does a very good job of shining a light on areas in history that typically get overlooked. And then I also would say it helps prompt like discussions of history and historical ideas among those interested in history. Like, if you want to see a bunch of history nerds get together and debate something, you can always bring up an alternate history scenario. Typically, there's obvious exceptions. Some historical people aren't interested in alternate history, which is fair. But yeah, it does prompt a lot of discussions among like history nerds about like historical ideas and if an alternate history scenario is plausible, and it's a very good tool for prompting discussions about things. And then I would also like to argue that alternate history helps analyze historical movements and ideas that didn't succeed in real life. I'll cite Kaiserreich in this because Kaiserreich, as like a very, very, very brief overview, basically it's Germany wins World War One, and a form of communism called syndicalism takes over Western Europe. And syndicalism did not gain traction in real life, but it was a historical movement. Like, and I think it's easy to get like overlook it, but Kaiserreich actually brings it into like the spotlight and helps people like not per se like analyze it, but like yeah, it helps shine a light on syndicalism and can like cause people to think about like, well, what are the pros and cons of syndicalism? Would it have worked? Yada yada. So I would say it helps analyze historical movements and ideas that didn't succeed in real life. Another good example is like the Morgenthau Plan, which was an alternate plan for dividing up Europe after World War II. It would have been a complete disaster, but yeah, it's like visiting it, like thinking about an alternate history scenario where the Morgenthau Plan was like carried out helps to illustrate like the fact that the Morgenthau Plan as an idea didn't work. So like that was what I meant by saying like alternate history helps analyze historical movements and ideas that didn't succeed in real life. But anyway, that's kind of all I've got to say in this video. I kind of wanted it to be a shorter one to begin with, so I think I'm doing probably okay on time. But anyways, yeah, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.